So you were born in 1937,
I was.
and where were you born?
I was born on the Isle of Wight. My parents had moved there with Mary, my older sister, who was a small baby at the time when they moved. And I was born on the island because my father had become organist to the parish church in Newport, which is the main town on the Isle of Wight.
How long were you living there?
We lived there for about... Wink was born, my younger sister was born also on the island. And we left when she was about 1.
And what year was she born?
She was born in 39.
So you
The
were...
war was on at that time. And we were evacuated from the island to either Newport, Monmouthshire, or Monmouth, Newport, near Newport. I'm not sure whether it was Monmouth or Newport. But
and
my father became the music teacher in the school there.
So the whole family moved?
The whole family moved to Wales.
Was that were you old enough to know that that was happening? Do you have memories of being pleased that you moved?
I don't remember anything about my childhood really at that stage.
What age were you when what would be your first memory, your earliest memory?
I probably don't remember much before I was 10, really. Only hearsay things, stories that have been told.
Okay. And are those stories that you feel are pertinent and reliable enough that you would be interested in telling us about?
Well, my mother was very good at telling stories that were amusing, and sometimes they might have been slightly embroidered, and there were stories that got carried through the family, things that happened or didn't happen.
And that's as much as you want to say about that?
That's as much as I can remember, really.
Okay.
There was a story about Mary and I when Wink was a baby. Mary and I went off together. Granny had just bought some newborn chicks and we decided to wash their hair. And they all died. And Granny was very upset and rather cross. We should have known better, especially Mary, who got more of a trouble than I did, and we weren't allowed any Easter eggs.
How old was Mary at that time?
Mary was probably 5. I was probably 2.
So 5 is probably not really too old to know.
No,
to know better.
she feels quite, even now she resents that responsibility that she was given before she was really old enough to take it.
So you say that your first memories were really at the age of 10. At what age were you when your father died?
My father died when I was 3, and Mary was 6, and Wink was 1. And he committed suicide, but we didn't know that until I was 20, when Mary was given the job of telling me. And Granny had just told her, and then I had to tell Wink. I think it may be like that.
Why? Do you have any sense of why that would be, that it went down the ages that way, rather than your mother just telling you?
I think it was so difficult for her to tell anybody, really. She'd lived with it all those years secretly in her mind and not been able to talk to anybody about it. But then when she thought that we were perhaps old enough to know, or she felt she should tell us, and so she told Mary, and that was probably as much as she could cope with, and she asked Mary if she would do the honours. She probably.
And do you know, or are you interested in talking any more about your father and about his death? Because he's obviously my grandfather, and I don't really know very much about it except hearsay.
At the time when he died, it was considered a sin to commit suicide. You couldn't be buried in a churchyard. You couldn't be given a proper funeral service. I know that my mother tried to make him sick because he'd taken an overdose, and she tickled his throat with a feather, was the story I was told, but again a story, to try and make him sick so that he could go on living. So she obviously had a very hard time. I don't know whether he committed suicide because he was a conscientious objector, and they were treated very badly by the people, the army, people who were in the army. He did ARP duties, which is firefighting, fire watching, instead of going to war. One night we had an incendiary bomb on the roof of our house, and my father was out doing fire duty, and my mother got a pot of geraniums and put it on top of the bomb and put the bomb out.
So the bomb was actually on fire.
The
It was
bomb
doing what it was supposed to.
would have burnt the house down, but she got there quickly and put this geranium on the top and smothered it.
Amazing.
I think Mum was a very strong woman. She had to be to cope with the three of us.
I seem to remember a story about a boy trying to put a bomb into a furnace. Is that correct? At the school, he'd found an unexploded bomb and tried to put it into the furnace, and she just caught him in time.
Was that in Birchanga? Where I don't know.
You know,
No, I don't remember.
I don't remember that. I don't even know where I heard that story.
No, I don't remember that.
So, so you were 3, and then your father died, and your mother. Was your mother working before that?
No, my mother was looking after the three of us. She didn't work. And then when we were evacuated with my father and my mother, my mother had to help look after the little boys who were evacuated from Birmingham to Wales. And so she had to look after all the little boys and look after us 3.
And of course they were evacuated without their parents.
They were evacuated without their parents. They were very homesick, and I think it was a very difficult job for Mum, trying to look after them and us.
I keep wanting to ask you questions about that, but of course I keep remembering that you don't really remember anything about that era. So once you were 10, you were living, where were you at that age?
Oh, it was when we were at Newport that my father committed suicide, and then we moved to live with my grandparents for a little time, and then my grandfather gave us a house in a place called Thorley Hill, and we went to live there for a time. And Wink was still a baby, and then my mother, she had a degree in maths, but she didn't have any teacher's training. She decided that it would be good to be trained as a teacher. So my grandparents said we could go and live with them.
By we, do you mean all of you, your mother as well?
All of us went to live with my grandparents, while Mum went to Cockerell Training College, which was a short distance from my grandparents' house.
Mm-hmm.
And Wink and I went to a creche while Mum was at lectures, and we met up at lunchtime under a big tree for a picnic. And Mary went to school, I think, at that time, because she was 6. I'm not sure which school she went to. Anyway, she went to school somewhere, and it was always nice meeting Mum under the big tree.
So you remember that?
Well, yes, I think I do. I think I remember that.
It's a little hard to know what.
Mum would take Wink on the front of her bike on a little saddle, and me on a little seat on the back, and Granny on the bike to this college, which was about a mile away from Granny and Grandpa's. And it took a year to train as a teacher, and then she got a job in Bishop Stortford, and then she got a headship at a village called Birchanga, which had a lot of American soldiers around, and they used to buy chewing gum for the children, and there was quite a lot of disease at that time. Children would get scabies and impetigo. I think health was very poor at that time. People were not properly nourished, and we got nits, of course, all the sorts of things that went with that time. life. I remember Mum, I think I do remember this. We were in bed and someone banged on the door, and it was a drunken man, and he started threatening Mum, and she said, "Now you just walk down that path there and go home." And he did. So it was what she was like. She could cope with situations that were difficult. We had chickens, we had rabbits, and the rabbits were eaten, and their fur was made into gloves by my godmother, who was very good at sewing gloves. I still have a pair upstairs of rabbit skin gloves that were made by my godmother.
And so do you remember your childhood overall as being a happy one?
I do, yes, I think. Especially, well, I loved living with Granny and Grandpa because they had a big garden, and Grandpa was fun to be with. He loved his roses, and we used to go round the garden with him while he pruned his roses, and he taught us how to do it. And he was, and then we would go to his grapes in his greenhouse, and he would very carefully thin them out so that there were only so many on a bunch, and he took great care of his roses and his grapes. They were his pleasure.
Do you think that's where you first got your love of gardening?
I think it probably was. Mum was very keen on gardening from them as well. He was a seed merchant, my grandfather. They had quite a ramshackle warehouse in Bishop Stortford where the seeds were processed, and they had great big hoppers that the seeds came down into big vats, and he specialised in linseed and clover and grass, and he could identify any grass from its seed. He was very, very knowledgeable, and it was lovely as children to dip your hands into the vats of linseed, which is all oily, and a lovely feeling when you put your arms into these seeds.
So was he selling the linseeds mostly to grow rather than to make oil from the seed?
It was all for growing, yes. It was all for
growing.
growing flax, and probably for linen, mostly, because I don't know how much oil was used in those days. But we used to go to seed merchant fairs with Grandpa sometimes, where all these, we thought of them all as very elderly gentlemen, would sit with their boards in front on sort of high desks with their sample pots in front of them, and we would wander around and look at all these different samples, and then we'd go to the swimming pool and learn to swim.
And then when you went to college,
I went to
university
college. Yes, Mum got a headship at Land Beach. We lived there for 10 years, and then I went to college in London.
Bedford?
At Bedford College, which is where my mother had been as well. She did her maths degree there, and I did botany, and I enjoyed it very much. It was very interesting. I had a good professor.
And after that you went to work?
After that, yes, I did a PhD and used an electron microscope, and I got a job as an electron microscopist for Guinness.
I've always been interested in that. Were Guinness funded?
Guinness was
research?
funded with their excess profits that for pure research labs. It was not researching onto Guinness.
I'm just going to pause this.